Welcome everyone to Phoenixville Public Library. I guess most of you virtually tonight, but we do have someone in our audience in person. We are pleased to welcome back to the library Liz Alakszay, who is an avid outdoor enthusiast, organic gardener, naturalist, business analyst, dog trainer, and educator, who's been teaching gardening topics for over 40 years. Liz was the Penn State Extension Chester County Master Gardener Coordinator for over 6 years before retiring in 2017, and a Longwood Gardens continuing education instructor and course designer on vegetable gardening until 2019. She continues to teach horticulture at Chester County Lifelong Learning, and tonight she's here with us to talk about how you can make your property a beautiful and welcoming space for all sorts of beneficial critters. So Liz, welcome and take it away.
Yeah, thanks Mark, and thanks everyone. I'm glad you could join us this evening. As Mark mentioned, one of my favorite topics is gardening, and a super favorite is how to do wildlife in your backyard. In fact, I think it was just queued up for me this past week because I now have a pileated woodpecker showing up every day and eating one suet cake every day. The whole darn thing. So hopefully I can inspire you to also have the pileated come and visit your backyard.
Oh, shall they feel free to jump in and ask questions?
Yes, you can feel free to jump in, and,
okay.
and I don't actually see them on that screen.
Right.
So
Yes.
I see.
Well, their video screens are turned off, so
Okay.
yeah.
So tonight what I want to go through with everyone is talk about what the basic needs are for wildlife to show up in your backyard, and then how to provide for those needs. Get into, of course, the type of plants that'll bring them in, plus some other environmental things that you need to set up in your backyard. Then go through a little bit on, there's a lot of birds and insects out there that really need our help. And if you've been following the news and all the publications, all those populations have plummeted terribly. Is that a question?
Someone have a question? Otherwise, please stay muted.
Yeah. I mean, I will take questions. I'll take questions throughout, and then we'll do some questions at the end. Well, your first thing I want to talk about, though, there's 4 basic things that you need to have on your property to make it suitable for wildlife. The first is food. A lot of times we think, the seeds and the berries, but there's also other things that need to be there. Of course, the seeds, the berries, the fruit, there's nectar in the flowers, and then other critters eat other critters, so you need to have other sources of protein that are attracted to your backyard. Sometimes people don't like that if the hawk shows up and borrows a squirrel or a bird from your backyard, but a good backyard habitat will have that happen. So your backyard wildlife really needs a variety of food sources, not just your plants on there. One thing we don't think about is water. If you don't have a stream flowing through your yard, and you might not want a stream flowing through your yard with the flooding that we currently get, but you need some sort of water source especially for the birds. That attracts more wildlife, the water, than actually the food. Water is that important. Birds, of course, need that for cleaning their feathers, pruning and preening and everything else they do, but your squirrels on a real hot day will come and drink, your chipmunks will come and drink. In the evenings, the evening critters will come and drink, and the frogs will jump in. So you need some sort of water source if you don't have a pond or a stream. Next, you need shelter. Those yards, those totally bare bone yards of all grass, and a shrub here and a shrub there. Not an ideal wildlife property. There's not enough shelter. It's a scary place. So they need places they can nest, they can hide. If it's bad weather, things to burrow into, and be safe. You need, I don't want to say a messy yard, but you need a yard that provides shelter on that. And if you have that, you will get a lot of very interesting wildlife showing up on that. If you've got the food source, a water source, and lots of neat shrubs. Mostly shrubs, your tall trees for some of the birds. If you have a large enough property where you can have a dead tree, that'll bring in a lot of those woodpeckers. Only if it's safe. I don't advocate, if this 100-foot oak is gonna crush your house. Not something that you want on your property. I had a 100-foot beech removed in December. It was painful, but that beech tree leaf disease that's coming around, it would be the house or the beech tree. So I said, okay, we're gonna have to get that removed.
Smart.
It hurt because it was huge, but had it been, if it was like a 7 or 10 acre property and the tree would have been on the end, I would have left it. But not an option.
I want to point it at the laptop, but you're okay.
Yeah. So let's go back to, or let's start with the first one and go into more detail on each one of those topics. The food. If you have a variety of native plants that provide food year-round. So in the spring, you're looking at the buds that come out, the flowers that provide nectar for your early pollinators. And now the berries are starting to come in on some of the trees and some of the shrubs. And then later in the season, there's trees and shrubs that leave fruiting later in the season, so you'll have the fall berries. If you have a Native American holly that's flowering now, it'll form the berries, they'll be green, they turn red later in the season, but they don't get sweet until the spring. So it's around March, late February, March, when I call it the robins show up. Not that they ever went away, they were just in the woods, but that's when the berries have a high enough sugar level that it's worth eating. And then you get flocks of robins coming in and just stripping your holly tree of the berries. I have that issue with the native winterberry. And you all seen the nice holiday decorations with winterberry. Well, I never have a darn winterberry left by the time it's the holidays, because the sugar level in that is like November-ish. So I have beautiful berries on it, and it's gorgeous in the fall. By the time the holiday rolls around, these branches, because they're stripped. But the holly's there. I can pick holly berries because they're not ready for another 2 months. So when you're looking at plants, you think of, when is the season for this plant to flower? When is it going to have fruit? So you have that basically all year on that. Your nut trees, your black walnut you might not like for reasons, but that's a great source. Acorns from your oak trees, a great source. Beech trees will provide that food for all year round. And then it's the wonderful thing about a wildlife garden, it can be somewhat, some neighbors might say it's sloppy, but I say it's ecologically, it's what you want to do, because you don't need to pick up leaves and you don't need to vacuum your yard. You just push all the leaves into your flower beds. It's nice to shred them a little bit, but not, you don't need to really do a huge, clean every flower bed out, pick every leaf up, put it and bag it. Just move it into your beds, rake it under the shrubs and the birds and all your amphibians that need to hide over the week or over the winter have a place to go, and the insects have a place to go. And by the time June rolls around, it'll be gone. Most of that will be pulverized. So it's a real nice, easy way to just recycle everything. So the leaves, the twigs that aren't too big, you can just put them on your flower beds, and it provides nice habitat. Brush piles are also a very nice place for things to hide. When you think it's minus 10 degrees out, where are these critters going to go? And these piles are actually warm inside because it's somewhat decomposing, and it provides a nice place for those guys to hide. And your neighbors will come around and say, wow, I've never seen so many birds, I've never seen so many wild animals. So you do get compliments on that, but they also wonder why you're having more fun in the fall than they are. So that's really great. excuse, to do that. It's also very beneficial for the soil, because at that point, as those are decomposing, and if anybody owns chickens, you know how they scratch and really tear up stuff. The birds are going to do the same thing to all that debris. The water I mentioned, you know, if you are lucky enough or unlucky enough to have a stream running through your backyard, that'll attract a lot of folks to come and drink from that. And the important thing, if you do have a natural water feature on your property, is you don't want grass growing up all the way to the end of it. You really want native plants and shrubs to hold that bank. You see a lot of erosion around Chester County. You see the banks all dug out on that. That's because it's a lot of times it's just mowed to the end. You really want things with deep roots holding that river, that stream bank or that pond bank. It's a buffer zone. But if you don't have something like that, a bird bath is great. And actually, I mean, this is, you know, I got this picture of a bird bath. But birds really would prefer that to be on the ground. So if you can do almost like it's, but shallow, 2 to 3 inches, maybe in a little mound, and again with some greenery around it, but enough so they can see if predators are coming. They will use, you know, they will use the things on the pedestal, but actually they would prefer, and think of it as a mini pond, if you can do that. I have dogs that like to drink that stuff, so I prefer the pedestal one. But I would get more wildlife, and the frogs would have a whole heck of a lot easier time jumping into that, and the toads than up, you know, the pedestal on that.
Got a comment on Zoom. I love my sloppy house slash yard. We only cut the grass. Just saw my groundhog for the first time this year. I was worried.
Yep. So if you get a chance, you know, add a bath, a pond, or a water garden. If you can get a mister or something that makes water trickling sounds, that'll bring in a lot of birds too on that. And in the winter, depending on how far this water source is from your house, you can run a cord, an electrical heater to it, or you can do what I do, because mine is way too far to do that. I just put boiling water in the morning, and if I'm working from home that day at lunchtime, I'll run out with more boiling water, and then do one mid-afternoon. And that does last. It's amazing how much heat water retains for hours. And the fun part about that in the winter is as soon as I'm pouring that in, the birds are lining up and just they're just standing there like we're getting a steam bath. It's really cute to watch. Some of them do plunge in, but mostly I think they just want the hot water steam on there, and they will drink that.
2 questions for you on Zoom. First one, can a concrete bird bath get repaired?
I guess it's cracked.
I assume.
I assume. Yes, there's putties and things that you can get it epoxy back together. The problem with a concrete bird bath is that you should take that in the winter, because it will tend to crack. But if it's cracked, there's epoxies that will seal that. And once it dries, it's not toxic. So if you can, try a non-concrete bird bath. But if you have it, that's fine. I think Home Depot, Lowe's carries the epoxy. So.
And how would you do a groundwater feature for frogs without attracting mosquitoes?
They have granulars, the trade name is mosquito dunks, which is a bacteria, comes in either pellets or like a donut shape. You put that in the water. It's not toxic to amphibians or birds or your children or your dogs or cats, because it's a bacillium something or other that attacks only mosquito eggs. So you would put that in that water feature, and they would be fine. That's a good question. Anything else?
Okay. Not at the moment.
Okay.
Somebody said they make a sealer that's suitable for aquariums. That's helpful for the concrete bird bath. Okay.
Yeah, that could. Oops, let's go back up. All right, the shelter part. All right, for shelter, this is the fun. You can have your native trees, your big trees, your huge 100-foot, and then your middle-sized trees, your understory trees. And then you have your shrubs. You can have the evergreen shrubs, the annual plants that flower. So you have a variety of growing things in your yard to attract all sorts of different shelter areas. Somebody mentioned on Zoom about mowing, if you can have an area that's grass-ish for critters that prefer the grass, but I'm not talking, and you don't mow low, you don't mow high. I mean, you don't mow low, you really want, you have traditional grass, 3 to 4 inch height on that. If you go with native grasses, that would be a true meadow that can be waist high or higher. You have to look at your township ordinances though for a lot of that to see what they permit. Some townships say for lawns you have to mow to a certain height. And if you're in a homeowner association, it can get even more dicey with that. So do check that. But if you have the capability of putting in grasses that can be 4, 6, 8 inches for the lawnish area, that would be ideal. And if you can go with native grasses, like I said, that get as tall as your head, that would be even better. But there's some places have ordinances against going that high. You could get away with the 6 to 8 inch with some frownies, but I'm doing a lot, and we're trying to do a lot in our township to educate HOAs about, it really can be very, very attractive. And then, I was talking about snags and dead trees to remain standing only if it's not a safety issue for yourself or your neighbor. Because that does, you get your woodpeckers, all sorts of wood boring critters and nesting things. It's a great source. Your evergreens and hedgerows and dense thickets. There's not a lot of native evergreens in this part of Pennsylvania. I mean, you have the Native American holly tree, you have some of the arborvitae, junipers. This is like the southernmost region for hemlocks. But we don't have a lot of evergreen, true native evergreens. So it's okay to wander a little bit out, get not native plants as long as they're not invasive. That does give some shelter. And then a brush pile for your fallen leaves and branches or logs. I have a corner in the property that I just toss all that stuff to. It's kind of my compost brush pile. Nicely surrounded by hollies so nobody sees it. The dogs can scoot under there because then you always need to check that out to see who's living in the brush pile, but it's not really, the neighbors really don't. It's not intrusive to the neighbors, but it's a great place for all sorts of critters, like that chipmunk. All I have to do is say chipmunk in it, and the dog go running to the brush pile because that's where the chipmunks like to hide. And then also dry stone walls, small piles of rocks. Your amphibians love to, like your salamanders, love to hide in those, under the rocks. And I have to say, so do the garden snakes. A lot of people aren't very happy with those amphibians, and I get a lot of people like, ooh, snakes. Yes, they're part of your wildlife backyard habitat, and no, they don't hurt you. It's pretty cool. The garden snake is a live bearer, so when she has babies, you see all these little baby snakes just squirming along, and they're really cute. And they're feisty. I mean, you want to say, oh, cute, and they're like looking at you like to stay away, and it's like, okay. But they're not toxic. You can also get the milk snake. Have you ever seen a milk snake? They're bigger. The garden snake's about, and the females, it's the bigger, the 3-4 foot garden snake is the female. The male's like about half the size on that. But the milk snake is a big black snake. Thick. Big, like 6 feet or something, and you first see that, you go, oh no. They are here. You might get a little squeamish about that being in your backyard. Again, they're not toxic.
There's a question, any way to send a message to the snake, I'm here, please stay away from me?
It'll stick its tongue out, and it'll sense you. Just don't make, if you're really, just go around it. Don't make sudden emotions around it. I'm silly. All my snakes have names beginning with S, so I have Samantha, Sylvia, Sam, and all these other things. And they'll say, "Oh, hi," and they'll stick their little tongues out and go the other way. Yeah, they don't. They just go around it and kind of acknowledge it's there, and it'll usually turn tail and will scoot the other way. My dogs have a snake bark, high-pitched bark, like, "Mom, there's a snake here." Because they're not fond of reptiles either, so they will go around that. And I know there's a snake in that yard. But yes, the rocks, so you're now like, I'm never going to add a rock pile or that, because they come in sun on that. And they're cold-blooded critters, they need something warm. It's a great place to hide. And to put another good pitch in for snakes, they eat mice, and they'll eat slugs. So there's a benefit to that. Luckily, we're not, if you're up in the Poconos, that's where you get the copperheads and the rattlers. And be a little bit more cautious if you're up there around rock piles. If you ever hike at like Hawk Mountain, just watch it, because there are rattlesnakes out there. You don't want to sit on a rock pile in Hawk Mountain without making sure there's no other critter there. But here we're good. The other things you'll get, got another question?
Yeah, Sweet Bay magnolia is sometimes listed as a native tree that is semi-evergreen. Is it native or not really?
It's native.
Okay.
It's a native tree, and it is, depending on the severity of the winter, it might or might not lose its leaves and the exposure on that. But it's somewhat of an understory tree, definitely native to the area. On my reptile thing, I did also want to mention box turtles can show up and hang out. Most people don't get squished about the box turtles.
Someone commented, I believe you can use beer to slugs.
Yes, you can. If I can diverge for a little fun story about slugs and beer. Yes, that's a great advice. Yes, they do like to drink beer, and they do like to drown in it, because they. But I gave that advice to one of my neighbors, and I got a call at 8 o'clock the next morning. And Jeannie's like, "It was awful." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She's like, "The raccoons." I'm like, "What?" She goes, "The raccoons came and lapped up all the beer, and then they partied. They like threw her trash cans all over the backyard and drank the beer." So, if by attracting wildlife.
There you go.
So yes, it can work. Just don't worry. Or I said, I don't want an 8 o'clock phone call that the raccoons also like the beer, because other wildlife will like it. But it does work for slugs if you don't have party-loving raccoons. So going back to the shelter and the food, the plants that you want to look at, the conifers, as I mentioned, there's very few really native ones in the pine and fir family that are native to southeast Pennsylvania. We do have the eastern white pine, but it's a huge pine tree that the limbs tend to be fragile and break. If you have, acres, it's okay. But it's not a tree that I plant in a small, an acre residential spot, because it's big and the limbs will fall and can cause damage. But consider that. The non-native evergreens are struggling, because they really prefer, even your balsam firs that are native, but they're Pocono, they like it colder. As it's getting warmer, they're losing their leaves, they're getting all sorts of fungal issues. They're definitely unhappy here. I had somebody from the night school that I teach in Chester County talking about hemlocks, which are native to Pennsylvania. This is about their southernmost region. On that, again, the heat and humidity is not their friend. They'll hang in there. They won't get as big as upstate New York or northern Pennsylvania. And then you have all the nut and acorn producing plants. And that includes the black walnut, I mentioned the beech, the hickory, all the oaks. And you have to remember that in your backyard, they're going to be in your backyard. All the oaks, acorns, I don't know why they call it. acorn tree or oak tree instead of acorn tree, and it can be slippery like marbles, so that's something to remember of where that tree is and where you're hanging out. So I had an elderly neighbor that she had all her oaks taken out from the front because she couldn't walk. It was a hazard to that. So something to think about if you're starting brand new and planting these things. Because once an oak tree starts producing acorns, it's a lot of acorns. But it's neat because you get all the woodpeckers, all yes, you'll get deer. If you get wild turkey, very high source of energy and protein, all the nuts on there. And beech trees with their beech nuts, again, birds love those. They're prickly. If you're walking around in bare feet or open-toed shoes, I mean, they hurt, those little beech nuts once they're open. But very, very good source of food for animals. And then all the grasses and legumes, that's why I mentioned it, if you can get your grasses tall enough so they flower, and the little grass seeds, the sparrows love that. If you've ever tried to start a lawn and all your grass seed that you put down is missing, it's because the sparrows come. Sparrow beaks are designed to pluck grass seed. And the fact that, we keep mowing lawns, that's why it's useless, because it never gets to the seed-bearing stage. If you ever watch a meadow and you see all these sparrows hiding in there, they're really tiny enough and they can stand on that stalk of that grass and pick out all the seeds. Really pretty neat looking. Let's see. Nectar producing plants. Anything that has flower has nectar in the center of that. That's going to bring in your beneficial insects and also your hummingbirds. The native honeysuckle is one that very highly attractive. It's the red honeysuckle. It doesn't smell, but it'll bring in your hummingbirds. And I saw my first hummingbird a few weeks back. I really took my head off as it was heading straight to the vine, and I'm like, "Whoops, you're back! Hi." And then your ornamental plants, back to the flowering ones. When I look for an ornamental plant, think of the typical daisy shape, with this circle center and then all the petals. That's what brings in the most pollinators. Because all those petals, the actual nectar is in the center part of that. Because the flower, the real true flower, is that center part of that round. And the petals are just basically glorified colorful leaves that are just pointing like the nectar's right in the middle. If you get those fancy rough leaf flowers, it's really hard for insects and, the hummingbird doesn't even bother with that, to get to the nectar, because it's all this roughly petally stuff. It looks really pretty, a lot of our hybrid flowers, but to get to the nectar is a real bear. So it's not that beneficial for plants. Now you have those pitcher plants, the foxgloves. The bees have evolved to be able to crawl in and get into those, but that's not roughly, that's just you got to crawl up and down. Beetles will do the same. And that brings, somebody mentioned magnolia. The magnolia is, the magnolia family traces back to early dinosaur period. It was an ancient line of plants. And it attracts, not bees, but it attracts beetles, because bees didn't evolve until later. So the pollinator your magnolias bring in are beetles. And they're the ones that go and crawl into that big cupped flower. So that's also a big, very open cup, not elaborate. And the beetle goes in and pollinates that, licks the nectar out of the middle. Bees evolved later. That's not the. I see some questions showing up.
Yes, got 3 questions here.
Yeah.
First one, is it okay to give feeder birds apple cores and hummus?
Yes. As long as it's, I'd say organic, yeah.
Okay, we saw a willow, quote unquote, willow shrub that had a beautiful pink sprout. Are they native, and who sells them around here?
There are native willows. I don't have, since I don't have a picture of it, I don't know which type it is, but there are native willows. Depending on where you live, I would check out gardeners locally in Chester County. to see if they carry it. And then there's always Lancaster County. You can always go out to Lancaster County with all the gardening places out there. Conestoga comes to mind. If you're local to Chester County, right off of 113 is gardeners. And they do have a nice selection of native plants. If you're closer to Delaware County, Mustardi is a little pricey, but they also have a nice collection of native plants. Don't know on that particular willow without a picture on that. And you said there was a third?
Yeah, actually, a couple more.
Okay.
Is it okay to feed food scraps to wildlife? Eggshells for birds, we are told, for calcium. Apples, oranges with peels. We have a fox that comes around. What would they eat? I have also heard that wildlife shouldn't be fed any of our food as it makes them dependent on humans.
Well, that's not quite true as dependent on humans. They just take advantage of the fact that they're getting a free meal. It won't mean that they won't go and eat other things. It's all right to feed them depending on what your local jurisdictional regulations are about attracting those. Foxes, if you have, you had your Thanksgiving feast and you have a bunch of leftover turkey, fox will take care of that for you. As long as, like I said, your ordinance are okay with you putting this carcass out on your yard. Or if you're in a place where nobody would know the difference. The fox would love you for that, on that, but they're meat.
Comment that somebody gives their fox whole chicken leftovers.
Yeah, fox will love you for that.
Yeah.
The one thing to think about though, and I've got a really good vet, a lot of times foxes get mange. And a reputable vet can give you something to put into the chicken meat that'll treat the fox for the mange. Because that can spread to dogs and sometimes to humans if your fox is mangy. But if they're already coming to chicken, there's, I don't know if it's a powder or something you inject, but she said, she'd be very happy to do that if I ever see a mangy fox on that. The other thing that your turkey and chicken might attract are the turkey vultures, which are really a blast to watch them eat that stuff up.
And last question I have, they ask about 4 different kind of plants, whether they're helpful. Pink azaleas, milkweed, ferns, and pachysandra.
All right, first one was pink azalea.
Pink azalea, yeah.
If it's a native azalea, yes, it'll attract pollinators, but there's a lot of hybrid azaleas, again, without knowing the specifics. Your milkweed, absolutely. That's the main food for the monarch butterfly larva. What was this?
Milkweed,
I had that, yeah.
ferns, and pachysandra.
Pachysandra, not really. It's a non-native ground cover. Then there's a native Pachysandra that goes dormant. That's not evergreen. That'll go dormant in the winter. The Allegheny.
River milkweed, she's clarifying.
And then the
Okay.
yeah.
All right. That's it right now.
Okay. Ornamental summer fruiting plants. And for the fruiting plants, fall fruiting and winter fruiting, we talked a little bit about that, but even if you're doing like a vegetable type garden, or you have apple trees and pear trees, a mulberry tree, raspberries, blackberries that you're trying to grow for yourself, blueberries, strawberries, there's a fall raspberry, spring raspberry. That's going to bring in wildlife. I have like a dozen blueberry bushes and I get a handful of blueberries for me, and the wildlife gets everything else. And that's okay, because I did that on purpose. I have a close friend who enclosed all her blueberries, planted all the blueberries in one patch, and then enclosed the whole thing in screens because she wants blueberry pie. But blueberries are super attractive, super attractive. And I watch the catbirds. At 4 a.m. they're out there picking the blueberries, and there's no way I'm going to beat that. And there's the early flower, the early fruiting, the mid-season, and the late season. So you're looking at that. Same with strawberries. My early strawberries are coming in, and somebody's eating them. Because when I rushed home from work today, I wanted to grab a strawberry that was looking really good late yesterday. it wasn't there. That's why I have the water bottle here, I wanted my strawberry, somebody decided to. But then there's the mid-season strawberry and there's a late-season strawberry, so that'll extend that. And then in the fall, you'll get your peaches, your apples, your pears. So be okay that your decide am I okay giving it to the wildlife, because many times they don't share? Or can I grow enough that I have a handful and they have a handful? Same thing goes with tomatoes, are very attractive to squirrels and birds, especially last year when it was really hot and dry. It's water and it's sweet. So they would be taking that. I had a little trouble with that because I wanted my tomato sauce, but so did the squirrel and so did the bird. So they'll peck holes. The squirrel will bite pieces out of it. So you can plan that, and again, plan it with, do I want to share? If I want to share, am I going to be okay with that? Because you're the one doing the majority of the sharing on that. So lots of plants to consider. The non-native plants, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have non-native plants as long as they're not invasive, but wildlife tend to be wary of those. It's like if you look at a new food that you've never eaten before, are you going to bite right into it, or are you going to just poke around and see if it's okay looking and take a little nibble? Same thing with wildlife. They're not going to go and jump at this exotic berry bush from Asia because it could kill them. It's a survival thing, and they wait for somebody to be brave enough to try it, and if grandma doesn't keel over, then maybe I'll try it. That's why it was the spotted lanternfly. Birds are now starting to go after them. When they first came in, birds were like, no, this is really attractive looking, but it could be toxic. But then some bird got brave enough to just peck at it, and it flew away, and the other birds noticed that and said, okay, maybe we can start. So they're starting to see chickadees and catbirds nibble at them. But it's not. So your non-natives take a while, and some of them they'll never touch. It's just too scary looking. So don't get mad at your kids when they look at strange food and say, I'm not going to touch that. It's built into us. Don't eat funny looking things if you don't know what it is. And then I have some. I did do that. Yes. Okay. Specific plants that I list out, and Mark, I don't know if you could send this to the folks that are attending. I'm perfectly okay with that. But I list some specific native perennial plants that are really beneficial in a wildlife habitat. So I'm not going to read through those, but I list. I have the common name, and then if you're really looking to identify, that's when people are asking questions. The second part in italics is it's called the Latin name of the plant. That's how I know what it is. Because somebody might call something bee balm, but it might not be the bee balm that I'm thinking of, or that's here. So that would be a monarda. There's lots of sages, and so Cranesbill is called geranium, but it's not the geranium that you're thinking of. Not the big showy geranium. It's a smaller plant that's flowering now. And the common name is Cranesbill, but it's also known as a geranium. So you'd be looking at a good plant tag in a good nursery will have these identified on that.
Someone on Zoom is asking, how do you keep squirrels and birds away from tomatoes?
Besides you don't. One thing that you could try doing, and this is kind of a pain thing, is you can bag the tomatoes. Put a bag of, say like a plastic bag around it, and zip tie it. But you'd have to do that to each tomato on that to make sure it doesn't choose to take that. So you might say, okay, this is the big juicy one I want for dinner, so you're going to bag that one. The other thing that if it can stay on is like the clamshells, the plastic clamshells around it. If the tomato's small enough or the container's big enough, and again tie it on there so it can't get to the fruit. I don't do netting, because I've seen too many bird fatalities. They want to get to it so badly, they get themselves tangled, either suffocate or get their neck all caught, or they break their wing. And that just gets ugly. The same thing with the squirrel, get caught and ends up chewing off its arm because it's all caught in that thing. So I don't do netting. I look for something that's more solid if I want to save that tomato. You could do every tomato in your plant, but I'm usually like, that's, they can have 10 of those, I'll take the one big one. That's the only, called Safeway, there's a lot of, they sell bird netting, but I've rescued too many hurt critters, some successfully, some not successfully, so I really don't recommend. The last woodpecker I had to save, it took me 2 hours to undo the netting. It was a red belly, and he was really patient with me. I mean, I'm not a wildlife rehab, but I couldn't leave this bird screaming in the yard, in a neighbor's yard. As I was out on a dog walk, we heard this bird screaming in this yard. So there I am with 2 dogs and, cut the netting and just brought the dogs and the bird back home. And I just spent hours undoing the thing. And then it spent a few hours just laying in a box, and it was, thank God it was okay. But that one was a successful story on that. So share your tomatoes, it's hard. This is one. So that's the specific plants, and then specific woody plants. Just say, let's see. Service berries just finished flowering. They're the very early spring white flower, and sometimes they're called June berries. They get purple berries. They're very tasty if the birds would only leave enough to actually do something with. But they're really a nice early spring tree, understory tree. That's the Alakszay. I mentioned the brambles, those are all your blackberries, raspberries. There is a native rose, native wild rose. It's not the escaped rose that we see all over the place. The native rose is actually a pink rose, but it is a spreader too. But it's a native rose. It has bigger pink flowers than the non-native Chinese invasive rose. And it attracts tons of pollinators. And then the birds like to nest in that because it's so thorny. So if you want to keep people out of your property, plant this wild native rose hedge. Granted, nobody's going to come through that. And deer won't go through that either. They might nibble on it, because deer do eat roses. Thorns and all, but they probably won't make their way through that. If you've got a wetter backyard, spice bush, the Linderna benzoin, is a nice shrub to have, but it requires wet. Again, this is just a selection of some of the plants that you can, some woody plants. And what birds can you expect to see? Picking on the birds, here's a list of some of the birds that you should see. Typically that would come to your backyard if you have a wild habitat. Some of them that you might have not seen. Yes, scarlet tangers do show up. They tend to be higher in if you have big trees, they tend to be higher up in there. Orioles, and you can hear the orioles are here now. And for an orange bird, you see one here, they're hard to spot. You can hear them before you can see them. You would think you would be able to see that orange bird. And amazingly, it's really hard to spot them. And then early on, the rose-breasted grosbeak will come through here, and you can see those guys. Some of the unusual ones that gnatcatchers that I have the pileated that showed up. So a lot of these birds that nest are really South American and further down. We'll come to your backyard. This is just just a sampling of those. And then animals to expect. Yes, of course, our friendly squirrel that you either love or hate them. And I don't know if you're familiar with the flying squirrel. We do have flying squirrels at night. You see this, you hear this little thump and you see something swishing, and it's a flying squirrel. And they're little, they're not that big. We also have red squirrels. And red squirrels are smaller than the gray squirrels. They also eat bird eggs. Your gray squirrel and your flying squirrel are not into egg eating, but your red squirrel will go and borrow some eggs from the nest. But that's part of the ecosystem of your backyard. You might not appreciate the striped skunk, but he'll show up. I keep telling my dogs, don't get interested in the skunk that's waving its tail, walking away, just come back here. There's the chipmunks, your possums. We've already talked a little bit about raccoons. Just be careful with raccoons. They do carry rabies. And if your raccoon is showing up during the day and just looking really not behaving normally, you have to call the game commission. And not your local police department, because they'll refer you to call the game commission. Because you do want that out of taken care of. Because they do, of all the mammals, they do carry a good carrier of rabies. Not everyone, but if it's not behaving normally. Bats. The big brown bat and the little brown bat. And your red fox, we have gray foxes. Our friendly white-tailed deer that eat everything. If you want to not have it eat, if you want to kind of control what the deer eat, those deer sprays do work. You just have to keep up with them. And you want to start spraying those areas before the deer decide that it's good. Because once they like your hosta, even after you spray it, they still might say, well, you know, it stinks, but I really love this salad. And so you want to start the program beforehand, and then you want to switch the variety of spray at least twice or 3 times during the season, because like our noses, they get acclimated to that. So you go from like hinder to deer off to scram, just to keep that. And then you're okay with them nibbling on certain things, but there might be plants that, no, we're not gonna do that. That works. We do have coyotes coming through. There's quite a few coyotes in Chester. There's lots of coyotes in Chester County. They look like scraggly, thin German shepherds. They won't hurt you. They're pretty secretive. And then the shrews and the moles, and yes, the bunnies, the voles. Now, somebody mentioned groundhog. Yeah, groundhogs are, they'll eat everything.
Yeah, they have one in our yard, eats all our weeds. It's like,
Okay.
Have at them.
Yeah, they'll eat everything.
Dandelions.
If you do have dogs, be careful. They can tear a dog apart. And we have weasels and mink that can come, especially if you have the water sources. I saw a mink last weekend. They do have really pretty coats. Really pretty. Like, we'll leave the coat on the mink. There's a picture of one of those guys there. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about the reptiles and amphibians, and it's the salamander. Most people are okay with the box turtle and the salamanders, and then our snakes. Yes, this is the garden snake. We do the milk snake on there. And then we have all sorts of the Eastern American toad and tree frogs, and then true frogs that show up. Spring peeper will be in there too as a tree frog. And then the last part that, because we said birds that need protein and not just the seeds, you do want these guys to show up, all your insects, you know, so we might get squeamish about the snakes, and then we mention insects and people are like, we're leaving. But you do want insects in your backyards. And here's a list of some of those insects, and all these are really great for the birds that like that kind of food. They like to eat all these things. And we'll point out, however, if you're allergic to bees and wasps, do think about that. What you want to attract, and if you have a severe allergy, then maybe all those flowering plants you don't want near your patio. You still want to attract them, but put them in a place that is safe for you. Allergies are those kind of allergies are nothing to laugh at. It's pretty serious stuff. But to get the butterflies and the moths, you're going to get caterpillars, and you're going to get things chewed up. We have a very good balance. You know, you've got the trees, the shrubs, and the perennials, and the annuals. They're not going to devour everything. So if you only have one of that plant, is where the problem is. So if you have a nice balanced yard, it's going to be okay, and you're going to get caterpillars. If you're into the herb growing, your dill, your parsley attracts swallowtails, the larva. So as you're picking your dill or parsley, you might notice this caterpillar on there. Do leave it, because it's going to turn into a swallowtail. And then spiders are the other, we might be okay with some of these insects, and then you get to spiders, and ooh, they're fine, and they're pretty cool when you get the big spiders on the webs, because they will eat, other insects, and then birds will actually eat those hairy wolf spiders. You should see these in there. If you have a water feature, you'll see the dragonflies, and they're really pretty. Now, why on earth would you want, besides the lower maintenance and a very relaxed backyard or garden property, why are we so interested in helping the birds and the insects, and why do we really care about getting native wildlife attracting properties? Well, if you saw a few years back, and then we did another report, just really recently, we're losing so many bird populations. I mean, it just, birds, and you see the graph here, 24% of our ducks, they're up a little bit, and our water birds are up. And that's because of the hunting conservation, the hunters that actually preserve the marshlands and all that, and they're funding efforts to conserve that, because their populations were down, and then all of a sudden the people that like to do the hunting said, oh, our hobbies are going to go away. So these are doing okay, but sea ducks are down. And then these are the birds that this section are the birds that we typically see in our backyards. 11% down, 27% down. The seashore birds are down dramatically. And then the arid and the grassland, the backyard. Other than the ones that are, we call it the retrieving, shooting birds, everybody else is down. And this is where our backyards, okay, I'm going to take the sea ducks out of there just for a second. But all these, we have a big influence in where we live and the properties we give. And I put the shorebirds in there too, because a lot of the shore development has taken away that habitat. You have all your resorts and condos and all that stuff, and the shorebirds have no place to go. They need the marsh and the dunes that come between the ocean and the mainland is where they would hang out. And it's not there because you have houses, because we like to watch the sunset over. But if those people could landscape around those properties in a way that replicated that would certainly help these guys. But our eastern forest birds, on this coast, western forest birds are the kind of typical things in the backyards here in Chester County that you would see. And if you have the meadows, we could help a lot of that. That's And they're really attributing that very much to habitat loss. You know, not climate change, not any of that, but it's really habitat degradation that's causing these declines in the birds. And more scary than that, insects, I know, were the heebie-jeebie, oh my gosh, insects, we don't like them, and we hate spiders, and you see all the commercials for, we're gonna come and spray, and I heard one today, I forget who it was, but they were saying, you know, we'll get rid of all these bugs in your backyard, call us now, call us today, and I'm like, oh please, stop picking on these insects. But you look at the numbers of what their declined families are. In 10 years, 41% of the insects are gone. And that's like the bottom, almost not quite the bottom of the food chain, but they're, you know, the higher level animals depend on these guys as much as we think they're like, and you're like, oh my gosh. And butterflies, I've definitely noticed that. I have a lot of pollinator plants and a lot of butterfly attracting plants. And I've been in Chester County, I hate to say, like 15 years now, and I've definitely noticed a lot less butterflies in my backyard. It's really distressing. I mean, they're just not coming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, beetles, bees, it definitely, I don't know if you guys noticed, the bees are definitely, again, if you have a lot of pollinator plants, I'm not getting that population of bees showing up. One or two here or there. And the rest, if you've been paying attention, it's not there. Like my spring vegetable garden, I have not a caterpillar on my broccoli. None, zero. Since when can you go out and pick broccoli and not worry about green caterpillars? And this is the third year in a row. Now I have lots of birds that are hunting desperately for food, that if there's a caterpillar on my broccoli, they've gotten it because they need it. But when I first moved to Chester County, I've always, you know, there was always that issue that I had to look for the critters on my spring crops. And the birds were still, I mean, they were eating, but the population was that high. So it's definitely noticeable. And when you think of that, this bottom is the one that provides a lot of the pollination for all the food crops that we eat. So if these are down by 41%, we're gonna not have our veggies and our fruits. And at the same time, the bird populations are also going to be suffering because the baby bird, a friend of mine works for the Bluebird Society, and he said a chick needs 3,000 insects a day, I believe, Ken. But if you don't have 3,000 insects per chick per day, the babies are going to die. That's why I think the Peleid is now showing up to my suet feeder, because it's not finding enough grubs out there. Because normally that would be digging for grubs in the trees, in the dead trees, but if all the dead trees are being taken down, this big woodpecker and the big chicks are really hungry, so it's going to eat that suet cake a day. So it's nice, but it's worrisome because it's going back to this. So that's why I think it's important to think of your backyard. Because if we all have backyards or wildlife habitats, you create a bigger, you know, not just Liz's backyard, it's your backyard, his backyard, everybody out there, and it's a bigger acreage for all these guys to do, to actually survive. And then if you can work with your homeowner association, if you have open space, let's landscape it as a wildlife habitat. You can put paths through there, that's not going to hurt the animals. Maybe, you know, people can enjoy nature and have a bench here, but landscape it as make your township ordinances that require developers to do native plants. My township definitely has that. We drive developers crazy, but it's like they want to build here, you got to do so much percentage of that lot has to be not built up, and it has to be native plants. Or go to the next township. But if we can do that all throughout Chester County, that just helps with all the. So it's an old. Doug telling me he's been around a while, and actually for a while I was working at University of Delaware, and I didn't cross paths with the guy because I was working across the other side of the campus, and I didn't have enough time my consulting gig to get to where he was. I was like, darn, and my project ended before he went to some other, and he's still there, but he was not around when my project ended, and I couldn't run over here. But I like his quote of, it starts with native plants are vital, and that if we take away this food and habitat with what we're doing to the ecosystem here, it's only if we redesign our suburbs to provide that, can we bring that back. Because if you lose them, they're gone. They're definitely gone, and that's, all those birds, my gosh, the kids will never see, you might never see the grosbeak if it keeps going that way. So with that, thank you for attending, and I'll take questions.
Yeah, feel free to, those on Zoom, feel free to unmute if you'd like.
Yeah.
Or you can type into the chat.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hey.
I just want to say thank you. This was so informative and so important.
Thank you.
It's wonderful that you took the time to develop this program. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And thank Mark for asking me.
Yeah, thanks for your informative information, especially all the listings of plants and birds and all that. One thing that wasn't mentioned are the eastern bluebirds.
Right.
We love them.
Yes, they're part of that.
Okay.
Yeah, they're part of that. Do you have a nest box on your property?
We did it one time, but the sparrows and the swallows kick them out. We hate that.
Yeah.
And because you were at Longwood, man, so we have my wife's sister's there.
Okay.
And Longwood actually, we're told, take out the swallow and sparrow eggs that are in the bluebird boxes that are non-native species, right?
Yeah, you can only do that to sparrows because the American tree swallow is a native bird and you can't do that unless they've got a special
Okay.
license. But for the house sparrow, you can remove the eggs. With tree swallows, you're stuck.
No, I see, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any questions? Go ahead.
Do bluebirds usually eat insects more in the summer?
Yes.
When they come to the feeders, we noticed a decrease in coming to the feeders in the summer.
Yes, they're definitely insect eaters. If you put out mealworms,
Yeah, they do that.
yeah, they will come. They will come and come to your feeder for the mealworms.
Right.
So
We had a request to send folks your slides.
yeah.
Okay,
That's
great.
perfectly.
I will do that, folks, tomorrow. And a couple people want you to come back for future presentations, so,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah, we will.
We'll
run
work on
here,
it.
Yeah. Come in 30 seconds before you.
Good, I'll be here for it.
No problem. I appreciate it,
All
everybody.
right.
Like I said, this is a great topic. Glad you guys attended, and go out and plant your yards.
Especially on this nice, beautiful night tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks for coming out.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Only one.